On February 24, 1933, gangsters gunned down Dennis Ziegler here in Chicago. Ziegler died in his son's arms. He leaves behind 11 children and his wife, Edna.
I'm Lissa Morgans, and you're listening to Call Edna. Episode 8, The Hump. Hello and welcome back to Call Edna, the podcast where we're solving my great-great-grandfather's gangland murder. And today we're on to our second suspect, Murray Humphreys. We've spoken about Humphreys a few times in our investigation, so first I wanted to give you a rundown of where we've seen him before. Humphreys is one of the first names that came up because he is one of the individuals who the police talked to after Bruce's murder. At that time, he was declared as Chicago's public enemy number 1, and he, along with Al Capone's cousin, Charles Fischetti, were questioned by the police about Bruce's murder, but that little was known. And by little was learned, I mean we've learned nothing from that interaction. We've also seen him as a member of Al Capone's outfit. We've seen him take charge of the labor racketeering business, both under Capone and the man who likely succeeded Capone, Frank Nitti. And we also saw him quite a bit in episode 4, The Racket, because of his expertise in labor racketeering as a member of the outfit. So we saw him in the bodyguard story. That was when, in 1932, Maloney was asked to step up and support the International, and he's asked to send people to help protect the new head of the International who was intending to speak at an event, and Maloney sent a group of bodyguards for him, and Murray Humphreys is one of those bodyguards. We've also seen him as a possible suspect in Red Barker's murder from 1932, and he was involved in the story of George McLean, a business agent of the Bartenders and Waiters Union, who was going to testify against the outfit in the early 1940s. And he was allegedly threatened by Dan Gilbert on Murray Humphreys' behalf. And later on, when the FBI starts listening to Humphreys on a regular basis, they hear him brag about this McLean story. We also know that Humphreys was involved in the TNT labor racketeering case and is charged in that racket at the end of 1933. And we've seen him mentioned a lot with his other associates from the Chicago outfit, including Red Barker, the one who was murdered in 1932, Marcus Studdy Looney, Three-Fingered Jack White until his murder in 1934, Frank Diamond, who is the brother-in-law of Al Capone, and Claude Screwy Maddox. And if you recall, as it relates to Bruce, we also know around the time Bruce was killed, Humphreys was out on bond pending an appeal of a 1-year sentence for gun toting, and so is Charles Fischetti, and we never actually heard what really happened with that sentence, but we know he did not serve the time for it. So now that we've had a refresher on Humphreys, let's get into his personal life. There's a lot of personal information about Murray Humphreys because there's a massive FBI file that was compiled after decades of investigation in 1958 about him and his life, and it's been made public through someone else's FOIA request. And so we have a lot of information about him. Starting with his name, it's actually not Murray Humphreys. He's of Welsh descent, and his original name is Llewellyn Humphreys. From the FBI file, his name is listed as Murray Llewellyn Humphreys. It lists his race as white, his sex as male, and his birthday as April 20th, 1899 or April 20th, 1903 in Chicago. And I saw this debated in a couple other places as well. Some records reflect 1899 and some reflect 1903. It lists his height as 5'9" to 5'10". It lists his weight as 152 to 165 pounds. It lists his chin as regular. I mean, these FBI files are wild. His hair as white, thin on top. Once again, this file is compiled in 1958, so he is older at this time. His teeth are listed as partial plate, gold, bad, which is rough. His build is medium, and his complexion is light camouflage. And in terms of his personal life, we know a lot more than we knew from William Maloney, and he does marry a woman named Mary Clem on May 9th, 1921. And he has one daughter with his wife, who they name Murray Humphreys, who becomes a concert pianist, and actually at one point either performs or appears on stage with Frank Sinatra. As you know, Frank Sinatra had a lot of ties to the mob. And unfortunately, due to her mental health, she does eventually go to some sort of mental health institution. They don't have any other kids, and they're married for a little over 30 years when they divorce in 1957. And Humphreys marries a younger woman described as blonde and in her mid-30s named Jean. And Humphreys will die in 1965. And as I mentioned with his name, he's of Welsh descent. And he adopts the name Murray after a judge in Chicago named Jack Murray takes some sort of special interest in him as he's going through the correctional process as a juvenile at that time. His parents are the ones who immigrated to America from Wales. And although it was many generations earlier, if my genealogy research is accurate, so too are Bruce's earliest ancestors who come over to America, either in the late 1600s or early 1700s, as part of the Welsh tract established with William Penn in Pennsylvania. And the town where Bruce's relatives come from is about an hour away from where Humphrey's ancestors come from in Wales. And Humphreys gets introduced to Al Capone's world in the early 1920s, and actually in a rather nefarious way, where he apparently hijacks one of Capone's bootlegging trucks. But he's eventually caught. And when he's caught, he essentially convinces Capone and his men that he's better working for them than he is dead. And Capone sees promise in him and agrees. And this is also quite interesting because although many of the people in Capone's outfit were of an Italian descent, not all of them were. And Humphreys will become a very high up individual who's Welsh, not Italian, in Capone's Chicago outfit. And it's worth noting, in the time before he equates himself with Capone, from about 1916 to when he's well engaged with the syndicate until 1934, Humphreys will be arrested and charged with a lot of crimes. But he's only going to serve time for one sentence between 1916 and 1934, and that's his eventual tax evasion charge in 1934. So he goes many years protected by the Chicago outfit. And at the time the report is written, he suffered 3 heart attacks, and he's in pretty poor health. And another thing I found really interesting in this report that I hadn't learned about before is that he actually had a bodyguard himself. So he's a bodyguard, and he has a bodyguard named Ralph Pierce. And he had that bodyguard as of January 30th, 1930. He has quite a relationship with the FBI. There's at least 2 or 3 individuals from the Bureau who track him for almost 2 decades later on in his life in the 1940s and 50s as he's often on the run. And they develop a really interesting relationship with him where the main investigator seems to really respect him. So much so that when he's eventually going to be arrested, the main investigator doesn't want to go and sends another team to finally get him. But something quite cheeky that Humphreys used to do, since he knew the FBI had bugged his meeting place, was apparently he used to begin every morning's meeting with the following saying, quote, "Good morning, gentlemen, and anyone listening. This is the 9 o'clock meeting of the Chicago underworld," end quote. And his death also involves the FBI, because when the FBI finally locate and come to arrest him in 1965, they open his door, and instead of being the cool, calm, and collected mobster he's known as, he has a .38 caliber revolver, and he's pointing it at them. They tell him to put down the gun. He's arrested and jailed, questioned, and then meets bail. Then that same evening, he's dead. He suffers a heart attack while vacuuming his house. And although this is ruled as natural causes, there are some conspiracy theories that this is just a little bit too convenient, that the same day he's finally arrested, he dies. And I have to agree with those people. it is quite suspicious that he dies that same evening. And something I came across that was really interesting while researching Humphreys is that he had a house where his first wife, Mary Clem, grew up in Oklahoma. And about 15 years ago in 2010, a couple bought that home, and there was a slew of news articles on it because this house was just beyond fascinating. It's this 2-story stone house that was apparently one of Humphrey's main hideouts. It's apparently located pretty set back off of the highway, and it came with a lookout tower, an Olympic-sized swimming pool, a secret room, and a large blue marble crypt, which contained the remains of Humphreys, his daughter, and his ex-wife. It also seemed to have bizarre things around the property, like a tree that had grown around a pair of plaid pants that looked like they were from the 1920s or 30s. And the couple tried to get them out, but they were stuck in there. And they also found some bones that they thought were a little odd. And it also had a lot of original woodwork. Apparently, Humphreys installed a lot of beautiful original woodwork and custom designs all over the house. And honestly, I can see why this couple was very interested in living in this old home. I'm sure it holds a lot of secrets. And not that I'm looking for connections between Humphreys and Bruce, because I think they're very different individuals in many respects. But I did think it was interesting that he completed home projects like the woodworking, just as Bruce did in his house on Tripp Avenue. So let's get into Humphrey's violent side, the side that impacts our investigation and possibly his connections to Bruce's murder in the winter of 1933. So going chronologically with a few examples. In 1929, Humphreys is one of the higher-up individuals in Capone's outfit, and he allegedly helped orchestrate the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, the infamous massacre where 7 gangsters of the Northside Gang, a rival gang to Capone's, were murdered. Jumping ahead a few years, there's one from January 12th of 1932 when Humphreys is investigated for the murder of Benjamin Rosenberg, who's associated with the cleaning and dyeing industry in Chicago. And the main 2 suspects are Murray Humphreys and machine gun Jack McGurn. Apparently, Humphreys was interested in his business. He's suspected to be involved in Red Barker's murder. As we know, Red Barker was one of the original gangsters who broke into labor racketeering with William Maloney and then started working with Humphreys and the Capone syndicate before he's murdered in the summer of 1932. Skipping to 1933, in January, there's the murder of Ted Newberry. According to the FBI file, there's an article in the Chicago Tribune on January 13th, 1933, stating that Humphreys was picked up for the questioning and the killing of Ted Newberry, a reported Chicago hoodlum. Then, in February 1933, we know he was questioned regarding the murder of Dennis Bruce Ziegler, my great-great-grandfather. And then skipping ahead a bit, likely because he absconded to Mexico for part of 1933 to 1934, he's one of the individuals suspected in the murder of another Capone gangster, Three-Fingered Jack White, along with William Klondike O'Donnell. And in the 1940s, he's suspected of a lot of murders in the cleaning and dyeing and laundry industries, an industry that he is intimately familiar with because of his labor racketeering in that space. And in the mid-1940s, he's questioned for the murders of 4 different people, all involved in those industries. And speaking of the laundry and cleaning and dyeing industries, this was Humphrey's main territory. This is where he really hit his stride in labor racketeering in Chicago and gives us a really good blueprint as to how he would enter these industries and corrupting the industry through the unions, the trade associations, and the business in general. So let's get into the laundry industry. And I wanted to give a shout out to an incredible book where a lot of this information came from, which is The Outfit by Gus Russo. As we know, it's likely Murray Humphreys who gives the idea to Al Capone to dive further into unions and declares that's where the best money is going to be, especially when Prohibition winds down and comes to an end. But Humphreys gets involved with unions and the like much earlier on, with his first attempt to get into unions in 1922, when he tries to get into the milk drivers union. Then he tries to go after the elevators operators union, thinking that with all the skyscrapers going up in Chicago at this time, that high-level residents and businessmen were going to need to rely upon them. Then, as we know, he tries to take over the coal teamsters union, which he does successfully for a while, involving the story of James Lefty Lynch. And then Humphreys, working with Barker, try to take over the ushers union. And Barker and Humphreys at this time sort of go one by one to the different unions, picking them off. They get into the Garage Owners Association, and then they eventually move into the laundry business. First, he buys Drexel Cleaners and Boulevard Cleaners. And then a laundry war commences, and he tries to buy or otherwise take over and control all the laundry business in Chicago. And he does it through violence. To give you an idea, there's about 157 laundry shops that are bombed in a 16-month time period as Humphreys tries to take over the industry. And Humphreys' use of the laundry industry, a legal business that he used to funnel illegal money through, is likely where the term money laundering comes from, as he literally used to launder the mob money through the laundry business in Chicago. And another really big union he tries to take over is the milk drivers union. And this is a big deal and results in a years-long war called the Chicago Milk Wars. But just to give you an idea of what this looked like, the Capone outfit decided that as Prohibition was coming to an end and they had all of these trucks that they used for bootlegging, that it would make sense to get into the milk business because it was very similarly organized in terms of delivering the milk. And the local milk drivers union, local number 557, had somewhere between $700,000 to $1 million in its treasury. And so Humphreys, starting in 1931, tries to take over this union, but he's met with a lot of resistance from the business agent of the union, Steve Sumner. And at one point in 1932, Humphreys offers Sumner $100,000 to walk away from the union, and Sumner declines. He's been a union man for a long time, and instead of taking the money, he makes his union headquarters literally a bomb-proof fortress, because as we know, one of Humphrey's techniques was to bomb the different laundry shops, and he has Chicago police officers stationed in a window across the street with a machine gun. He also has a bulletproof vehicle that he drives to and from work. But unfortunately, bombing was not Humphrey's biggest skill. He's one of the most famous kidnappers of the early 30s. And he kidnaps the head of the union, a guy whose nickname is Old Doc, and then charges a $50,000 ransom to Sumner for his return. And Sumner does pay it, but he keeps up the fight, and it seems like it works. And as the years go on, I believe the Milk Wars last until about 1939. It seems like his efforts have paid off, and the union belongs to the workers. And as a follow-up from the web, my dad had a couple of things to tell me about the streetlights. I wanted to ask you. You wanted to talk to me about transmission lines.
Okay, yeah, sure.
And how do they work? And what did I get wrong with specificity?
Well, here's the one problem about that. You're dealing with a guy who has no memory. And so I can't, it was 2 weeks ago that I thought you got it wrong, and of course I can't remember. Oh, I know what the part was. You were talking about whether they could control the flow of lines on the transmission system by operating some controls at the generation station.
Yeah.
And that's not the way it works. There are controls at the generation station, but those control the input of juice into the grid. From the generator. The opening and closing of the connections and the wires are done in a different room. They're done in the transmission control room.
Is that in the same building or elsewhere?
It's probably elsewhere because there are generators all in various locations.
Okay.
And now the control room may control the generators as well, so it could be all in the same location. You could be, and of course, and the control room does control the connections between the generator and the grid, because that's part of the transmission. At least I think that's the way it works.
And then you were saying with the local control, with someone shutting off the wire, you believe that someone could shut off a live wire, right?
Yes, yeah, because there are, the electric utilities have very skilled and talented, well, that would be the same thing, uh, um, linemen who work on high voltage wires when they're live. That's to the best of my knowledge.
Do you think someone in the 1930s would have had sophisticated enough knowledge to work on a live wire? Or how do you think the wire would have been, or the electricity would have been cut?
Well, to answer the first question, that's a compound question. You get to, can you break that up into two parts, Counsel?
Yes.
Going to the first part, would there have been the knowledge to do this? Certainly in the hands of the electric utility maintenance workers, they would have the knowledge. But answer the second question, what would be the most likely way in which the system would have been temporarily deactivated? To me, what they would have done is gone to the distribution area network, which you see it in your neighborhood. It's like a trash can on top of a telephone pole, and just disconnect it and then reconnect it.
Kind of like a fuse box for a house?
Exactly the same.
Okay.
Yes.
And they would be like neighborhood by neighborhood?
More like a circuit breaker, because you can open and close the circuit breaker. And it's neighborhood by neighborhood. I mean, even smaller than neighborhood by neighborhood. These little transformers that open and close the electric service, at least today, to customers, there's one every few houses.
Yeah. And we don't know exactly how it looked in 1933, since it would have been a relatively new grid at that time. But you don't think it's very different than now?
I would be surprised if it's very different. I would think it's pretty straightforward technology. You have big wires that are carrying the heavy load, and then there are step down transformers that continually reduce the power as you get closer to the neighborhoods, and ultimately they reduce the voltage to a voltage that can enter your home, 120 or 220 volts. I don't think that technology is it's not all that different, I wouldn't think. I mean, I'm sure it's more sophisticated now, but the basics, I'm thinking, are probably the same.
Okay.
Be my guess.
And you're working on a side project that you're going to report back to us about?
Yes, yeah. I'm hoping to be able to talk to someone at Commonwealth Edison, the electric utility serving Chicago, with an excellent employee who's got knowledge, an excellent distribution service employee who has knowledge of, or what the distribution network may have looked like in the 30s, and how a person could have cut off service to the streetlights on one street.
If you had to guess, do you think the getaway car would have stopped on its way out to reconnect the lines?
That makes no sense to me.
Me neither. I think it's someone separate. Maybe they get dropped off before, but they're separate operating, and then you have the people in the car.
Yeah, I also don't see why they would try and reconnect the system at all anyway. I mean, I would think they would just disconnect it and skedaddle out of there and wait for Commonwealth Edison to come and reconnect it.
That's what I'm confused about, is I'm not sure how it's reconnected. Some accounts, though, say it was only a 5-minute outage. I don't think Commonwealth Edison would get there that fast and reconnect it.
Well, they're an excellent utility.
But if it's out for an hour or so, there's no newspaper reporting saying the utility reconnected it. There's one, I can't remember his name, but in the newspapers we got from the attic last week, there's one police officer who is adamant. He's either a state's attorney or police officer. He's adamant that the streetlights didn't go out at all.
Okay.
But everyone else says they did, including our eyewitness and our family members. And I don't think you'd make something like that up.
Right.
The plot thickens.
Indeed.
There's not a lot that links Humphreys directly to Bruce's murder, but Humphreys seems to be someone who's always on the periphery. And as the person who's in control of labor racketeering for Capone's syndicate in 1933, I think it's very likely that he's the gangster counterpart of William Maloney. I'm not sure if he actually carried out the hit against Bruce, but he definitely would have ordered it or somehow been involved. There's just really no way he wouldn't be. And all this got me thinking. Sumner was approached by Humphreys for a bribe, just like Bruce was approached by Maloney for a bribe. And Sumner resisted, just like Bruce did. But Sumner is able to keep up protection on himself and his union in a way that Bruce is not. As we know, Bruce did have police protection, but it ends at the end of 1932. And that's a really big deal, because with all the violent things going on in Chicago at this time, I think it's that lack of protection that made him so vulnerable. And in going through the attic a couple weeks ago in Chicago through Bruce's papers, which was just a treasure trove of original documents, which we're going to continue to talk about, that we will eventually have a full episode on. There's just so much to go through. But I wanted to read to you from a family paper that I found, quoting, "In 1933, my dad, Dennis Bruce Sigler, was killed by the mob because he fought to keep his union local number 569 hoisting and stationary engineers clean. He was harassed, threatened, and there were 3 unsuccessful attempts of kidnapping, my brother twice and my sister once. My father did have an ally in the state's attorney's office, and he put a detail of policemen at our house around the clock. This lasted until the new state's attorney, Thomas Courtney, came into office. The detail was removed, and in 2 weeks my father was killed a half block from our house." End quote. We knew previously that there was 1 kidnapping of Bruce's youngest child, but it sounds like there were actually a total of 3 kidnappings, and that just reeks of Murray Humphreys and his doing. And we have additional information here, if it's true, about what exactly happened with the state's attorney's office, and the fact that it was Thomas Courtney's new appointment in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office that likely led to Bruce's protection ending, which seems to me to be a big difference between someone like him and someone like Sumner, who is able to keep his life as he fights against the Union. And as I went through Bruce's papers and researched into Murray Humphreys, this got me thinking. I was curious if someone like Steve Sumner, who was fighting the same battle that Bruce was, just in a different union, knew him. And I quickly found out that he did. In going through Bruce's papers, I found an extract from a speech by Steve Sumner on April 10th of 1933, talking about Bruce, quoting, "On the 24th day of February last, Mr. Dennis Bruce Sigler, Secretary of the Operating Engineers Union, Local Number 569, with headquarters right here in Chicago, at 612 West Adams Street, made the supreme sacrifice with his life in defense of union labor. Briefly, this is the story of how it came about. Dennis Sigler, whose life as a labor man has been beyond reproach, and against whom there had never been one word of censure, as secretary of his union, had charge of the road building work in Lake County and all through the northern section of Illinois. Well, the gangsters, through some connection and tie-up they had in Lake County, saw a chance to take over the work which Dennis Sigler and legitimate labor union men were doing. Through a series of acts of terrorism and intimidation, they forced some local authorities and contractors to do business with them instead of Sigler. Sigler fought back as best he could, but it was a losing fight. Now Dennis Sigler was a man well known to me, and on a Wednesday in the early part of February this year, having heard of the struggles of the Milk Wagon Drivers Union and the program we adopted to stop the hoodlums, he called on me at your headquarters, and he told me the burdens which lay in his heart and the danger to him and his union. He told me how all his life he had struggled for union labor and was interested in the working men connected with his union. He said he took pride in trying to build his union and make it strong. He related to me the story of how the gangsters had approached him, and when he had not yielded, how they had threatened him. There, in my office, that night last February, Dennis Ziegler gave me in detail of what was going on in Lake County with regard to the paving contracts. He explained in detail the scheming and conniving of the gangsters to destroy union labor and gangsterize a legitimate union, of the threats and intimidation and terrorism directed at the contractors and everyone who had anything to do with the building of roads in Lake County. All of this to say was unfolded to me by Dennis Ziegler, and it was a revelation, which could not help but arouse the sympathy and indignation of a man, even if he were not himself actively interested in the preservation of union labor. I sympathized with Dennis Ziegler, and I told him he was making a brave struggle. I said there was just one thing to do, and that was to keep on fighting. Don't let the gangsters take over your union. I'm with you, and so is honest, organized labor throughout the country. Well, I think it was 2 weeks after he was in to see me, he called me up and made another date to come in and talk over some more of his troubles. He seemed anxious, and he wanted to have me give him some advice on how to save his union and the road building work for the men, which was being more and more controlled and influenced by gangsters. I made another date with him, but that night, just as he alighted from a streetcar on his way home to his family at 3716 North Tripp Avenue, within a block of his home, some men were waiting for him, followed him down the street, came up almost close enough to touch him, and shot him down in cold blood in the middle of the public sidewalk. And Dennis Ziegler, who stood up for honest labor unions, was shot down by muscling gangsters. And he is another victim of the merciless gang killings of Chicago. And I can guess who they are. Signed, Steve C. Sumner, Secretary Treasury, Milk Wagon Drivers Union. End quote. So not only did Bruce know Sumner, Sumner may have been one of the last people to ever speak to Bruce while he was alive. According to this speech, Sumner was on the phone with Bruce on that Friday. And another thing that I learned from this letter is the paving contracts for the roads in Lake County, which we hadn't been told about before, and I think present another interesting angle as to why Bruce would have been murdered at the time he was. Not only did he not have police protection, but apparently he was involved in a very specific, I'm guessing lucrative project with the road building work in Lake County, and they needed to get rid of him faster than Sumner was able to help him. I know we've thought about why Maloney would act in February of 1933 to murder Bruce, and I've suspected previously that because Bruce was in talks with federal agents about Maloney and tax evasion, that maybe Maloney knew about that and decided it was finally time, now that he didn't have the police protection, to take out Bruce. But this is another angle, and it's directly related to the racketeerism that the gangsters of Chicago were doing. As we know through our stories like Murray Humphreys, once they entered an industry, they controlled it violently. In previous episodes, we talked about how racketeers would even show up to the job sites to intimidate and pull workers off of the job through Maloney's orders. And that's what I think might have been going on here with this road building work in Lake County. And I have to think that the king of labor racketeering in Chicago, the king of kidnapping, Murray Humphreys, was involved in this road building project. Because so far to date, I don't know a single labor racketeering project he wasn't involved in. It sounds like if you needed an industry to be fixed, he was the person you went to. And I also think it's astonishing that all these years later, laying in family papers in an attic is a speech telling us of someone who might have been the last person to speak to Bruce. Now we have a description of what Bruce's state of mind was like on that Friday as well. Sumner describes him as anxious and in want of help and advice. based on the increasing control and influence by gangsters on this project. So while I know this episode was mostly about Humphreys, it leaves us with more questions than answers. Are Humphreys and his men the gangsters who were muscling in to this construction project in February of 1933? Was Maloney, who controlled everything on wheels, with them? And what's Thomas Courtney's role in all of this? If Courtney is the one who got rid of Bruce's police detail, is he more involved in this mystery than I once thought? We've sort of been viewing him as somewhat nefarious, but secondary to Dan Gilbert. But now I'm starting to think, maybe it's him, at the direction of Gilbert, who gets rid of Bruce's police protection at the end of 1932. And if that's true, they're part of the premeditation of this murder. And we're looking at a much bigger conspiracy than I once thought. As we sort out those questions and go through Bruce's papers that were in the attic, next week's episode will be a bonus episode, focusing on Roger Toohey's book, The Stolen Years. So we'll see you next time in The Scapegoat.